Madam Speaker, before I respond to President Trump's claim that the rescue and recovery effort in Puerto Rico a year ago after Hurricane Maria was, quote, one of the best jobs that's ever been done, end quote, I want to make a few things clear. First of all, everyone is praying for our friends and neighbors along the eastern seaboard who will be facing the wind and rain of Hurricane Florence today. I support them and the first responders who are helping and the people running shelters and delivering medicine to the sick and the injured. And I fully support FEMA, Homeland Security, and state and local governments for what they are doing, especially the brave men and women on the front lines in harm's way today. Secondly, in the last few weeks, the official death toll of Hurricane Maria was raised to 3,000, based on a meticulous study of the George Washington's Milken Institute of Public Health, and the number is based on facts and the truth. More people died in Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico than died in Hurricane Katrina, and that died in the attacks on September 11th. That's not fake news, Mr. President. The temptation is to fault FEMA and the job they did in Puerto Rico, and I want to make clear, individuals at FEMA and FEMA as an agency did heroic work in Puerto Rico, and FEMA is continuing to do that work. I flew with FEMA pilots 10 days after the storm hit, and I saw their work up close. It is clear that they saved lives. But let me also be very, very clear. With 3,000 people dead, for the president to say that Puerto Rico was a success, a triumph of his presidency, is simply delusional. Only in the president's mind could he give himself an A+. Only in the president's mind could we go a year without an apology to the American people for his incompetence in managing a crisis where 3,000 people died, Mr. President. And now he denies that they even are dead. He takes a man of humility, honor, and compassion to admit that when they've made a tremendous and deadly mistake in caring for the American people, and we know we do not have a man in the White House who is capable of such emotions, of empathy, or basic human decency. And this Congress has failed to provide any meaningful oversight for fear they might embarrass the president with the facts. Thursday will mark 1 year since the storm hit, and think back a year ago. The popular and charismatic mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, called for help on national TV, saying, "People are dying." The president had a meltdown because he doesn't like being criticized by women. So the mayor's words were more than the president could take. Most of us knew at the time, and all of us know now, a year after the storm, the mayor was right, the president was wrong. People died. He was dead wrong. Disasters required preparedness and rapid response, but FEMA was not fully prepared, and they were not fully supported in the rapid response by the Trump administration, which was then and is now a disorganized mess, and we don't need Bob Woodward to tell us that. Yes, the massive power of the storm was compounded by decades of neglect from Washington, which contributed to the debt crisis and infrastructure collapse. And to be clear, Puerto Rico's problem didn't happen overnight and didn't happen on President Trump's watch. But let us also be clear, it's his watch now. As President of the United States, he is responsible for Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory that belongs to, as a possession, property of the United States of America. Yes, islands are surrounded by water, Mr. President, in the case of Puerto Rico, deep water. But FEMA and Homeland Security never called the most powerful military in the world, U.S. military, which has capabilities and capacities well beyond those of FEMA. From the beginning, the president's focus was on damage control from a political standpoint, not damage control from a human life standpoint. The sad truth is that in trying so hard to make sure that the hurricane didn't become Trump's Katrina, we lost far more lives. This was a disaster mismanagement, and that lies at the feet of the president and his administration. What is offensive to many of us is that even though the president dropped the ball, he is now doing a victory dance in the end zone, or should we call it the dead zone. I pray that his response to the current disaster unfolding along the East Coast will be better and more empathetic. He has a golf club in North Carolina and a winery in Virginia, so maybe the American people in those states will get more of the president's help than my fellow Puerto Ricans did. And I pray the response is more successful.
Members are advised to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross Layton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.